This week, one of the most controversial mainstream comic storylines of the past decade, Captain America goes Hydra. Joe and Kendall from the Wayne Manor Memoirs podcast join me for a two-part discussion of the series Captain America Steve Rogers and Secret Empire. First, we're getting closer to unlocking a new podcast about the manga Fullmetal Alchemist, The Law of Equivalent Exchange. It's a chapter-by-chapter reading of the manga, analyzing how creator Hiromu Arakawa masterfully put together the story of Edward and Alphonse Elric, with commentary on the translation. What are we missing from the original Japanese? Even translation of the sound effects can be a bit tricky. Patrick and I have already started recording the show, and we can't wait for you to hear it. If you're a fan of Fullmetal Alchemist, one of the best manga of the 21st century, pledge now at patreon.com/deconcomics to hear The Law of Equivalent Exchange. This is Tim.
This is Joe.
And this is Kendall.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo, and we've got two guests today, Joe and Kendall from the Wayne Manor Memoirs podcast. How are you guys doing?
Doing all right. How are you?
Okay, so, I was wondering, how do you guys know each other?
Well, we both used to work at the same university. I actually had Kendall as a student in one of my comic book themed courses, but yeah, we were work buddies that turned into friends.
Yep.
I see.
He invited me out to play a Star Wars kind of D&D game, and then from that point on, we were friends.
I see. But interesting that one of you had the other in his class, because that's how I met Mulele.
Oh, nice.
Because working at Yokota Air Base, where I used to work, he had no connection to the base. I'm not sure how he ended up doing it, but he was teaching I was working in my webcomic at the time, which I ended up dropping when I got too busy with podcasting. But so I had actually requested that the Arts and Crafts Center should have a comics drawing class. And I think it was about a year later that they started having the class with him as the teacher. Actually Deconstructing Comics kind of arose out of that class. So tell us about your podcast.
Why don't you start off, Kendall?
So it's basically just a podcast where we pick out topics that we like about Batman and then kind of go real in-depth about them. We started off doing some F-list villains, and then kind of branched out to, depending on whatever we felt like doing, kind of vaguely similar to Batman, or that could tie in some way. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, you did one about the Question recently. I listened to that.
That was Question's one of my favorites, so that was a project near and dear to my heart. And then we've discovered that we both love Kamandi, which has only the barest connection to Batman, but don't tell me how to run my podcast.
Yeah, so now we just find stuff that we like and kind of go with it.
Okay, but it tends to be all DC. I mean, if you do Marvel, you can't connect that to Batman very well at all.
We have joked about doing the Daily the Daily Bugle Blast, and once a year doing a Marvel comic, but then we get opportunities like this, right? Now we can talk Marvel.
Right.
Right. Well, at the start of your show, you kind of talk about whatever comics you've bought lately. Of course, these days there aren't any comics. The comics have kind of gone away, but we're still talking about the comics that came out in the past. And I think it was Kendall mentioned you had read Secret Empire just recently.
Yes. Yeah, I had purchased it and never got around to reading it because I really liked Nick Spencer, and every time I'd read the first couple issues, I was hooked, and then I don't know what happened. I would just kind of fall off. And so I finally sat down now that I had some time and just went through it and absolutely loved it.
I see. Now, have you guys tended to read the Marvel crossover event books?
I'm very particular. They have to speak to me, and they have to have an ease of entrance. So just recently they did Absolute Carnage, and as a kid of the 90s, symbiote nonsense was everything the 90s was about. So I picked up everything for that, and I felt that I got my money's worth out of it. But I hadn't done that since the first Civil War.
Wow, okay. Yeah, after Fear Itself, I fell off because I was I felt like the each event was getting less and less interesting, and I was tired of being told to buy half the Marvel line in order to figure out what was going on. So since Fear Itself, I think the only one I've bought was the Secret Wars that Jonathan Hickman wrote. And that was okay, but otherwise I had been completely avoiding them. And so, and also I haven't really read any Avengers related books in several years. My Marvel buying has been really minimized. My comics
Mine
buying
too.
has been minimized because I've been trying to watch my money. But but then when you guys were talking about Secret Empire, and I knew about the controversy, I thought, well, I'd like to read that and see what it was about, and maybe this is an opportunity for us to collaborate on something. So I invited you guys on.
Yeah, and I'm so excited to be for someone to want to hang out with us.
Well, so much of geekdom is solitude, so right. So, I had catching up to do, and it's hard to figure out where to start because these stories all kind of bleed into the next one.
So much. I mean, go ahead, Kendall.
Yeah, there's a ton. I remember kind of starting with this one, and that's, I think, part of the reason why I never finished is because there was just so much. I don't remember whatever the kind of lead into having young Steve back was, but I know it had to deal with Maria and some sort of Pleasantville kind of thing.
Pleasant Hill, yeah.
Right.
So
yeah, I have not read that. But
me neither.
There was an event called Avengers Standoff.
I remember
that's what it was.
I remember the issues coming out, but I didn't know anything about it. I wasn't invested.
Yeah, I was completely unaware of it, I think, until the next Thunderbolt series came out. And I mean, if it says Thunderbolt on it, I tend to buy it.
Me too.
But this was the one with Bucky, with the Thunderbolts and the little girl version of the Cosmic Cube, Kobik. And so in the first couple issues of that, I was getting all this backstory I knew nothing about. Oh, okay, yeah. What's it, Pleasantville?
Pleasant Hill, I think.
Okay, which was a Cosmic Cube kind of created idyllic community where the supervillains were all sort of brainwashed into thinking that they were normal suburbanites and living pleasant lives there as a way to have sort of a prison to keep them.
Yeah,
and
100%.
And also, I think, to explain why some of the characters just hadn't been around, right? None of the characters from Thunderbolts had been showing up in anything lately. And boom, here they are. They're all back, and this explains where they've been.
I see. Well, so before we get into the story, I wanted to complain a little bit. Let me have my rant here.
Absolutely.
So when these events are coming out, it can be confusing enough to figure out what to read next. But when you're trying to reassemble it several years later, it's even worse. I mean, there is a trade of Secret Empire, which I read, and before that was also the Captain America Steve Rogers series, which I also read for this. But that one in particular, I mean, I wasn't sure what else was going on at the same time as that, and I didn't even figure out until I got all done with this that Civil War II happened during that Cap series. So it's like just event. But yeah, the Cap series doesn't explain very well some of the Civil War II stuff that's in it. It just assumes that you've been reading Civil War II.
Yeah, and it felt like Cap being part of Hydra played almost no role in Civil War II, except to give him more motivation that the superheroes were wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you see several times, people are tired of the superheroes arguing with each other and blah, blah, blah. So forget about them and Hydra should take over. So it kind of, bolsters his motivation for what happens in Secret Empire. But yeah, I mean, I did wish that they had packaged the trades better so you could kind of follow what was going on.
Or at least, I feel like with all of these events, how hard would it be to publish a little, web infographic that tells you this is the order to read, this is the stuff that's important? Because
I did finally find a list like that on the GothamArchives.com. That was helpful. I was wishing I'd found that sooner, because the list, I guess, that Marvel put out and that you can find on Wikipedia and other places that's supposed to be the sequence of stuff to read in Secret Empire was really incomplete. But with this list that I found, I'll put it in the show notes. I could figure out where everything went. Of course, I didn't read all the tie-ins. I read stuff that I already had on hand, like the Thunderbolts and the Amazing Spider-Man story that didn't really tie in with what we're going to be talking about at all.
He was not even showcased until issue 9 of Secret Empire?
Right,
issue
yeah.
10?
Peter Parker Spider-Man barely shows up in this. There's more Miles Morales. He's more of a central character. But yeah, Peter Parker's got his own worries. This is, when he had his own corporation. This is actually what ended his company, the Secret Empire. But yeah, so in Standoff, the important point is that Cap had at some point been turned into a 90-year-old version of himself. I don't remember how that happened now.
I remember reading it, but couldn't tell you how it happened.
There's a villain that extracts his powers or something.
Okay.
I don't remember who it was, but it happens in the end of whatever his series was, and then Captain America Sam Wilson happens. Mm-hmm. So he's passes over the shield, and then which makes it even more confusing when you get Captain America Steve Rogers, and then you've got the Sam Wilson stuff, and they're running concurrently, but also not really tying in all that well.
So I guess in Standoff, Crossbones was beating up 90-year-old Cap, and Kobik saw that and touched Steve and tried to make him all better and turned him back into his younger state that we're accustomed to. And did something else too that people weren't aware of at the time. Until Captain America Steve Rogers #1. And in that, so they're on a mission in Bagalia. I was not aware of this location in the Marvel Universe. It's been around a while, I guess, but...
Yeah, I was not aware of it either, but I loved the idea that Taskmaster got to be the sheriff of this supervillain country.
Yeah, fandom.com says it's a sovereign island nation. I don't know, for some reason in the comic it's called the city with no laws, but apparently it's actually really a country in most tellings. But so Steve is there with Jack Flag and Free Spirit. I was not aware of these heroes.
I knew
Sharon
Jack
Carter.
Flag. I knew Jack Flag. I had never heard of Free Spirit.
The thing about Free Spirit, I don't know, this is really a tangent, but in the 70s, and I don't know why I remember this, in the 70s there was a bra called Free Spirit. I kept seeing advertisements back when I was, and I remember this was when I was in 6th grade, because there was this, Free Spirit offered this like t-shirt with a butterfly on it, and you could buy it. And one of the girls in my 6th grade class had this t-shirt. I think that's the main reason I remember all this. I never asked her about it, but it was clearly the Free Spirit t-shirt. So I thought it was really appropriate that Free Spirit was a female superhero. But anyway.
That was her. That was the before time, right? She started out as a bra producer and then became a superhero after a radioactive bra bit her.
Something like that. So they're all there in Bagalia, and Zemo is in some kind of aircraft, small aircraft, with the scientist Eric Selvig, who I knew from the movies. I wasn't aware he existed in the comics. And Selvig is tied up, and Cap goes up into the aircraft and is like fighting with Zemo. And at one point, Cap is hanging out the bottom of the airplane. And so Jack Flag sees that and gets on this little kind of flying disc thing, and flies up to the aircraft and punches out Zemo. Now, Steve, we don't really understand why yet at that point, but Steve is not really pleased that Jack is there, and pushes him out of the airplane. And some issues later, Jack dies. But then Cap turns to Selvig, tied up in the passenger seat, and says, "Hail Hydra." And then the internet melts.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. So I have this issue. I picked it up the day it came out, not knowing anything about it, and I think I ended up reading it that night or the next day, and I was able to make it to the end without it being spoiled by the internet, and I loved it. I thought this was such a interesting and unique twist on a Captain America story. Kendall didn't agree with me at the time.
At the time, no, I was not a fan at all. I was one of those, I didn't go on the internet or anything and rage, but internally I was like, all right, well, I guess I'm done with this comic.
So did you stop buying it then?
I actually picked it up for the next couple issues because that's how our pull system worked. But after that, I was kind of done. And sadly,
which is funny because I had every intention of picking up this book for the whole, the whole process. I was all on board, and I never ended up getting it added to my pull, and didn't realize until issue 5 or 6 when all the previous issues were sold out. That I had not been getting it for months.
I see.
Yeah, this was an exciting process because I'd always wanted to read these anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did a little poking around on the web about the controversy. And so Nick Spencer says he knew it would be controversial. Marvel knew it would be controversial, but they sort of failed to realize how much the existence of the movies would amp that up. That it would be not just comics fans that would be up in arms about it. That, like, your mom would hear about it on the radio or something and be all upset because, she knew lovable Cap from the movies.
You can't make Captain America evil. My kids love him.
And, I don't remember if it was on the podcast or not, but Mulele was upset about it too. And I knew that it had to be because of the movies, because he hasn't read Marvel in decades. So, but because of the movies, and he's so bought in on the movies, that he was upset about it too.
I mean, what fired you up, Kendall?
I guess just the decades of Cap history that I knew inherently, and then also I guess the movies had something to do with it because they're just more pop culture friendly. They're there. They're easily seen and digested, and everybody that watches him loves Cap because he comes off so authentic. And then to see him, that authentic good guy, he's not even that over-the-top patriotic, but he is still patriotic. And then to have him say, "Hail Hydra," you're like, oh no, this is not the way it should be.
Chris Evans is saying, "Hail Hydra," no.
Right, yeah.
He's too good looking to hail Hydra.
But, so I think part of it, too, goes back to the idea of Hydra being part of the Nazis and the King being a soldier during World War II and him having a character created after... and then people kind of just assuming Hydra is part of Nazism, I think was a big sticking point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember Mulele talking about that too, that Hydra was essentially the Nazis. Of course, in the movies, maybe it's a little bit different from in the comics, but yeah, I mean, the Hydra sort of fills in for the Nazis in a lot of ways.
Though they try to distance themselves from that in the series that, well, in the movies, that Red Skull's doing his own thing. But in the comics, this particular arc, they instead rewrite history that the Red Skull kind of takes over Hydra after they get subsumed by the Nazi army. So that they existed before the Nazis, they exist after the Nazis. But I hadn't even really considered that, right? The connotation of making Captain America associated with the Nazi movement. So now I understand why you get so many flashbacks that try to establish this alternate history of Hydra.
Another thing that I guess some people brought up was that the creators of Captain America, Joe Simon and Jack Kirby, were both Jewish.
Right.
Sure.
And that they thought it was terrible to make their creation into a Nazi who would kill Jews. Although, of course, in the comic, in this series, Hydra says nothing about Jews.
No,
right. In fact, they try to play up the unity through strength aspect. And I guess the only group that really gets actively oppressed is the Inhumans.
Yeah. Now, I guess another point was that in the actual Secret Empire story, Magneto, who has been shown to be a Holocaust victim, seems to be sort of abetting Hydra. He's like, I can't think of what the word I want, but he's not doing anything to stop Hydra. He's just saying, "Oh, okay, we're just kind of going along with it." Nick Spencer you can see him in these interviews from 2016 on YouTube, and he seems so unperturbed by the whole thing. Death threats and all, like, "Oh yeah, whatever." And I guess that he was a little too readily engaging these people on Twitter at the time and getting in fights and stuff.
Yeah, that's It's kind of hard with fandoms because there's so much personal investment that people have with them. And so I get it from a creator's perspective, especially his, since he knew where it was going to go and how it was going to end up and all of that. But I don't know if I would have actively engaged with him in that kind of manner.
It's so strange, the difference in opinion, because when I read the story, there were a couple, the first issue, the Hail Hydra happens, I'm shocked, but the things that I immediately know are, at some point, this is not going to happen, right? Like,
yeah, it always gets undone.
He's not going to be Hydra Cap forever.
No.
And as I said earlier, this is a super interesting story premise. And they don't even make you wait, right? The next issue, you get everything about how Captain America became a soldier for Hydra.
Right.
You don't have to hang out for 6 issues or whatever to piece it together. They just info dump you. Issue 2.
Right. So when Kobik restored, healed Cap, made him young again, she also made him a Hydra loyalist and somehow changed his timeline so that he was recruited as a kid. He and his mom were recruited by Hydra, and he was taken away to this school and indoctrinated that Hydra was the best, and then somehow he, it's a little convoluted, but he still ends up getting the super soldier serum and is a sleeper agent in World War II.
Mm-hmm. Secretly best friends with the younger Baron Zemo.
Yeah. Right, Helmut Zemo, who is the Zemo of the current comics. But yeah, we see his dad in here. What's this? Heinrich Zemo?
I think that's right.
The father, who shows up in the flashbacks too. They switch it so that instead of Heinrich Zemo trying to kill Cap and Bucky leads to the death of Heinrich Zemo, which makes Helmut Zemo want revenge on Bucky. Although that was a weird scene because you see Bucky is at like this computer terminal or something, like what? In the 40s, controlling the rocket with a on a keyboard. Like I don't know about this, but
some of the I like the timeline stuff because of the shift in the palette, right? That everything is like black and white except for occasional splashes of red, which I think is a cool artistic choice. Mm-hmm. Look at me, Kendall, paying attention to art.
Hey, there you go. I knew it would rub off one day.
But some of the changes to history and how other people sort of perceive them, it was one of those things I chose not to look too hard. Right? Because Madame Hydra seems to acknowledge this new timeline, like that she was also training Steve, but she shouldn't have that knowledge.
Right, so she shows up in the present. Yeah, her real name is Eliza Sinclair.
Yeah.
And she's involved in recruiting. She does recruit Steve and his mom back in the 1920s. Right, but then, she shows up in the present. So, I had not thought about that, but that is, I mean, her existence there really makes it seem like all of this is factual. That it's not just that Cap's personal timeline has changed, but that it all really happened.
Right. You're left with sort of this decision. Did Hydra actually win World War II and they use the cosmic cube to change it? Or did Kobik actually just change Cap, right? Like, they keep telling you it's just Kobik, but, you never really get a firm answer outside of, well, that seems crazy.
Yeah, but I think, Nick Spencer worked so hard to convince you of all this that then it was a little hard to resolve it at the end. It's not a completely convincing fix. And
right.
The existence of Eliza Sinclair in the present makes it much worse too. I hadn't thought about that. Right, and so the Allies supposedly, as you said, got a cosmic cube and changed everything, which made me think, if they had a cosmic cube, why fight the war in the first place? Just wish the Nazis away.
And the next thing we know, Germany never existed.
Right.
Little Terminator timeline.
Okay, so in Captain America issue 2, now I did not understand this. So Cap lets the plane crash into a building with Zemo and Selvig inside. Somehow neither of them dies. I mean,
right.
Taskmaster finds what appear to be their bodies in the wreckage, but then it's revealed that both of them are alive, and Cap saved them, but he never explains how.
Yes,
or did I miss something?
Nope, you didn't miss anything.
So, I mean, that's one of several Nick Spencer fudges I found in this story, and there are probably more than I missed, but...
Yeah, I was willing to accept that he saved Selvig and had a plan for it, but then when Zemo showed up alive too, I was like, how did did Zemo know this was going to happen? Did you just have a couple of bodies ready? But again, trying my best, right? Trying my best to not think, enjoy the story, not think too hard about the pieces. Because there are, as you said, Tim, a good handful of places where the pieces don't fit quite as tightly as you'd like them to.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering, as I was reading this, so is Cap supposed to have been pretending all these years that he was on the side of the U.S.? But apparently, from the time that he came out of the ice up to when Kobik touched him, he was not aware that he was a Hydra agent. And that woke him up in this revised telling of his life. It woke him up and reminded him that he was Hydra. So he was not acting all these years.
The ice buried some memories real deep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, long-term concussion.
And a little girl with godlike powers got rid of it.
Yeah. Did you notice, by the way, depending on the artist, Kobik looks very different in different issues. There didn't seem to be a good model for how to draw Kobik. Everybody was drawing various looking little girls.
It's secretly what we don't know is it's all their kids. Everybody's daughter is now in this every issue.
So, but this Hydra Cap, so you can still see in his character that he's Steve Rogers. He won't give up, and he sticks to his convictions, but somehow the idea that Hydra is best is really embedded in him. I didn't quite believe that, even as a kid, that it was, I don't know, that I felt like that there would still be a little bit more of a conscience there, even as a kid, saying, no, I don't think so. And later on, at least in the early Secret Empire issues, you do see that he's dragging his feet a little bit.
Yeah.
And I thought it would have been more interesting if they had kept him in that mode, but we'll get to that later.
That was, I think, the biggest thing that I got out of the Captain America Steve Rogers arc leading up to Secret Empire. I ended up being very impressed that Nick Spencer could take Cap, clearly make him out to be the next big villain, and still maintain all of the pieces of Captain America that you love, right? He's still compassionate, most of the, very compassionate to a fault, as you said. It didn't feel like it wasn't Cap, right? It just felt like it was a Cap that had been led down the wrong path. And I was very impressed with, the first 12 issues of Captain America Steve Rogers.
And he still loves Sharon. And he's still, Rick Jones is great and Bucky is great, but, they're not on the right path in his mind. But he doesn't hate them. And he even, supports Sharon for becoming head of S.H.I.E.L.D. I wasn't quite sure why he did that as the story went on, but he loves and supports her in spite of his Hydra leanings.
I just think he was convinced that he would be able to convince her to join him under this sort of Hydra umbrella because their love was so strong and deep or whatever.
Yeah, I imagine so.
Because you see that a little bit in Secret Empire.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, he still ends up, despite the fact they're kind of on the same side, he still ends up fighting Red Skull. They're still enemies, even though they're now technically part of the same organization.
Right. Well, in the Cap series, we see several times Steve bowing to the Red Skull or a projection of the Red Skull from elsewhere. Steve takes off his shirt and paints that Hydra logo on his chest. I don't know how you could do that art that good upside down, but I suppose he looks in a mirror, but I didn't quite buy that. But
he gets a lot of crap from the Red Skull if it's not painted right either.
But yeah, eventually we find out that he feels like Red Skull has perverted the true meaning of Hydra and made it into a personality cult. And later on in the series, Cap kills him and thus takes over as the Supreme Hydra.
So the big issue is that Red Skull has part of Charles Xavier's brain.
Yeah, I wasn't sure where that came from. Yeah, he's got Xavier's brain.
I'm pretty sure that happened in Axis.
It 100% did.
Because I read that main series, now that I think about it. But I've definitely blocked most of it out of my memory.
It wasn't good. Yeah, he became the Red Onslaught.
Oh, great.
It's the Charles Xavier's brain. Yeah, it was... it's when he created the... or when the Shockwave went out and made heroes villains and villains heroes, and it was not good, and it lasted for 8 issues before Marvel rebooted it.
Right. I think I have all the main arc for that.
Yeah.
But there's a couple issues in Uncanny Avengers, if that sounds right, where Rogue is leading this team of mostly X-Men and some other people to capture Red Skull so that they can extract Charles Xavier's brain.
Right. I didn't read that, but it was referred to in the Cap series.
Yeah, I went and it was 2 issues, and I went and took a look at them, and it was a lot of fun, but it seems like a really important thing to just be like, hey, remember when we took that part of Red Skull's brain off camera?
Right. So, so before that, Steve was concerned, how is he going to kill the Red Skull if the Red Skull has Xavier's brain and can predict what he's going to do? You can read his mind. But yeah, once that the Xavier's brain has been extracted from him, I don't know what he's got for a brain instead. But then it's easier to trick him and kill him. And plus he's weakened from the surgery, the brain removal surgery.
As I think most people would be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was performed by Beast. I mean, he's probably got a little bit of blue hair in there. That's what they replaced it with, is just blue hair.
The sheddings from Beast.
Yep.
So before Steve becomes head of S.H.I.E.L.D., and so he becomes head of S.H.I.E.L.D. because Maria Hill was removed for the Pleasantville, whatever it was, that stuff in Avengers Standoff. And Sharon Carter's offered the job, but she says no, it should be Steve. But there have been a couple of initiatives that have been put in place. So there's the S.H.I.E.L.D. Act, which expands S.H.I.E.L.D.'s authority so that if there's a state of emergency, the head of S.H.I.E.L.D. is put in charge of the military and all police forces, which I'm not even sure is constitutional, but...
It's very Roman.
There's that, and then... Yeah, and the way that it's done in this later... I mean, it's as if the head of S.H.I.E.L.D. becomes president, really. I mean, because the president's supposed to be commander-in-chief of the military. I'm not sure why you would take that away from the president in a national emergency. But the other thing is there's a planetary S.H.I.E.L.D. And yes, there are too many things in this series that are being called S.H.I.E.L.D. The organization, the act, and the planetary S.H.I.E.L.D., which is supposed to protect the world from aliens. And the Chitauri are coming. But Cap, now that he is head of S.H.I.E.L.D., he secretly wants them to invade to create a state of emergency and trigger the S.H.I.E.L.D. Act. Then there's a suicide bomber who apparently takes out the base station for the planetary S.H.I.E.L.D., but as Tony Stark and, what's her name, Riri? Ironheart,
yep.
They discover later that apparently that bombing was just a ruse, and actually it was shut off at the network level, and it was just superficial damage done by the bomb.
All of these pieces coming together, right? Him becoming the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., the planetary S.H.I.E.L.D., which is going to prevents anything from outside Earth getting in. The Shield Act giving him complete control over everything. Like, you can see it. Like, you can see that these are going to be important pieces. Mm-hmm. But until that issue 0 of Secret Empire, right? Like, you may know this is all going to be important, and then bam, it all hits at once, and you're like, wow, that's a strategy. How do you get rid of the most powerful superhero on the planet? Well, you lock her outside the planet.
Right. So one other point of the Cap series before we get into the actual Secret Empire, the Cosmic Cube gets broken. And I guess that actually happens in Thunderbolts. But then in Cap 16, so Zemo and the Masters of Evil, have gone to, I think it was the North Pole, where the Thunderbolts are based, to get the stone back and to get Bucky back too. I think Bucky is captured. And actually, the Thunderbolts are mostly captured, too. But Selvig is there, and he wants the cube to be Kobik again. It seems like he's taken, like, a fatherly interest in Kobik or something.
That seems to be it, that he, like, he knows so much about the Cosmic Cube, and he thinks Kobik is his little girl.
So, Fixer has the pieces of the cube, and Selvig tases him, grabs the fragments, and leaves. And we don't know exactly what he's going to do at that point. But now I also wanted to mention, in both the Cap series and the Secret Empire series, I mean, it's a dark story, but I was surprised at how much humor there was.
Yes.
There were a number of points that I really laughed at.
They have just like very similar to the cinematic universe. They have just selected characters whose personalities are meant to be lighter. Scott Lang, Ant-Man, makes lots of really good quips. Star-Lord has a couple of good quips.
Well, I mean, you even have Red Skull and Zemo saying funny lines. That was what surprised me. Well, I think it's early in the Cap series. I mean, it's a really dark scene in a way where, like, Red Skull is upset by the kitchen staff, and he's having them all shoot themselves. Although I don't know, if you give people guns, how can you be sure that they're going to use them to kill themselves rather than you? But he's saying something. I didn't put it in my notes, but something like, "I told them that the celery base wouldn't be good for the soup."
Yes, I remember. He mind controls them all to kill themselves.
Okay, that's right. He's got Xavier's brain, so...
Yep. And his daughter is there. I think her name is Sin.
Sin.
And she's like, we'll have to hire new ones.
One thing I did put in my notes from Secret Empire 1, where Natasha and Clint are talking, and she says, "You think we were too hard on them, Clint? I mean, when I was their age, I was a programmed assassin." Clint: "I was in the circus." Natasha: "Who can say which is worse?"
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, there were these funny lines, although sometimes I felt like the art was working against it, because the art, especially certain artists like Andrea Sorrentino, I don't think that... The art is very dark and serious, but also I think it's not very good as comics art, because it's so kind of photorealistic that it looks really static. There's no kind of action or movement to it. It looks frozen to me. And, if you think about like a Jack Kirby panel, it's much less realistic, but it has so much more energy to it, which I think is more important for a superhero comic than this kind of dark, serious, static art. Any thoughts?
Yeah, sorry. I know that Kendall is a Sorrentino fan, so
Okay.
I thought that he was going to jump in there.
Well, I was waiting for you because I knew you knew I knew.
Oh, okay. I knew that you knew that I knew that I knew.
Right.
So we've covered quite a bit of stuff on our show from Sorrentino, and I think what we've discovered is she's a good artist for sort of crime drama, sort of street level, dark and gritty. I had a lot of issues with the number of artists that they jump through in Secret Empire.
Yeah.
And you get some of them that can do the dark and dismal sort of depressed sensation that this story is going for. And then you have some other artists that just are not hitting that same tone, but are trying. It was a little bit troubling for such a big storyline to have so many different artists.
Yeah, I wonder what the story was on that. Well, even like the later Cap issues, you start to see that these various artists who are taking, like, you got one artist doing this set of characters and different artists doing that set of characters, and yeah, it's not seamless at all. It really jumps around.
Yeah. Also, Sorrentino's a guy.
Oh, is Sorrentino a guy?
Yeah, he's Italian.
Ah.
So just
did I say her?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't
okay.
sure. I was avoiding pronouns because I wasn't sure.
Yeah, it's a guy.
Well, sorry.
I really like Sorrentino. I don't know if I love his art here. I like it in the Secret Empire issue 0, where it's kind of that free comic book day, and it sort of just gets you into it because of how much it jumps around.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he works really, really well when it's like a singular focus. Like his work on Green Arrow with Jeff Lemire was fantastic.
Yeah, that's where
But
you sort of dug in, right? That was your first real experience?
I can't remember if it was... That's the first one I remember reading
looking for sweet comics with the Clock King?
Right, the Clock King. The chubbier Clock King. But yeah, that's where I remember kind of really getting my first taste of Sorrentino's art, and I think it works really well there. I don't know if it works so much in here or even in Joker Killer Smile. There is some stuff in that works really well, but his art is so distinctive that it lends itself to a kind of specific story, or at least a specific tone.
Mm-hmm.
And this book jumps around so much that I would agree it's a little bit more flat, I think, because of that, because it's not, his style isn't lent to the theme.
Mm-hmm.
Man, you hit something else there too. Not only does the art jump around a lot, but tonally, this arc is kind of all over the place.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, you got those comedy moments, even in pages. I remember there was a page drawn by Sorrentino where, it looks real dark and serious, but you got Miles Morales saying a comedy line. Like, it just clashes.
Right. And when he does, like, the dark Cap stuff, it works perfectly well. But when you get that lighter stuff with either Natasha and Clint or Miles or any of the younger group, I don't remember if they had a name.
I think they called them the Champions.
The Champions, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. It doesn't quite work as well there.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that the ability to switch between humor and darkness is a key feature of Nick Spencer's writing.
Hmm.
The Fix, which is where I was first introduced to him, the very first issue, you're introduced to this crime boss, and he's sitting at home with he's a stay-at-home dad, and he's making like a vegan meal in a Hawaiian shirt, and he's talking to these two guys, totally cordial. They excuse themselves and go out to the garage, and he shoots a dude in the head. So they go from this, just very different pacing, very different tonality. And I think that's one of the reasons he works well for Spider-Man, is that that's kind of always a feature of Spider-Man, is the darkness right behind the levity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that works really well in the story. I just don't know if the art necessarily always lends itself to those tonal shifts as well as it probably could.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
One other axe to grind with the Secret Empire series, as we're coming up to that here, the narration. I didn't like the narration. It's kind of overly dramatic. you don't know who's saying it. I mean, it seems to be just sort of the voice of all of the heroes. A particular narrator is never identified. And it was, here's an example. We were sinking, ready to let go, and then we saw it. A reason to keep fighting, a hope for the future. It wasn't much, but for now it was enough. And it's just kind of like, it's always about hope is rising, hope is falling, and it starts to feel just sort of unnecessary and repetitive to me. I mean, sometimes it's also kind of running in parallel with particular scene that's happening in the panels, and it's scattered throughout the panels, which I also don't like, especially when it's broken up by dialogue, and then I lose the thread of what the narration was saying. But yeah, a lot of the time the narration just felt like it was repeating the same points. So hope was rising, hope was falling. I didn't like it. Did you have any thoughts about the narration?
I agree that there was an overwhelming amount of it. And Kendall and I talk about this all the time, that you didn't necessarily need to be told everything, right? A lot of scenes, it was quite obvious that, Falcon has showed up as Captain America and he's giving a speech. These are going to be moments where people are feeling good.
Right. Yeah, exactly. We don't need to be told that.
Yeah. I think it works well in some cases. Especially the idea of when they are trying something and then they fail, only to have it maybe reverse, or it sticks in that moment, or in the very beginning when you kind of are seeing it from almost a flashback point perspective, and you're seeing like, and we had hope, and it shows you a picture of Captain America, and you're like, oh, I get that. And then we lost it because, he came down the ramp with a bunch of Hydra people and he picked up, Mjolnir or whatever. So in certain cases, I like it. But in others, yes, it gets a little heavy.
Mm-hmm. Coming up, we get into the Secret Empire series proper. What's up with the use of the name Alpha Flight? Why so much freedom in Hydra's America? And more. I'm continuing to republish classic episodes of Deconstructing Comics in reverse order, unlocked by our patrons' generous support. This week I'll republish number 57 from January 8th, 2007, in which I described to Brandon my first time going to the Tokyo Comic Market event. Remember back when we had public gatherings? Find the classic episodes on our Facebook and Twitter feeds by choosing the earliest months listed in the sidebar pull-down menu at deconstructingcomics.com. in publicly available posts on our Patreon page or in the Patreon smartphone app. Classic episodes have been unlocked back to number 46. You can help to unlock earlier episodes by pledging. Check out all our goals and help us reach them at patreon.com/deconcomics.
Welcome to the Superman Fan Podcast. My name is Billy Hogan, and I will be your host. Before we begin our journey through the time barrier, please ensure that your red indestructible capes are securely fastened around your necks so that we may all travel safely into the past to explore the Silver Age adventures of the Man of Steel in the pages of Action Comics, Superman, Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane, and World's Finest Comics. After we return from our journey, I encourage you to go to the website, thesupermanfanpodcast.blogspot.com. I look forward to have you join me each week to explore the Silver Age adventures of the Man of Steel.
All right, so now we're at Secret Empire issue 0. Now, there was a 0 issue, and then there was also a free comic book day issue. And they're in the trade, the 0 issue is first. So,
yeah, I messed up. I was thinking about the free comic book day one. And I think I just put them together. Sorry.
No problem. So, in the 0 issue, the Chitauri invade. Captain Marvel and the other high-powered heroes are above Earth and at the Alpha Flight space station. Now, I need an explanation about this. Why is this space station called Alpha Flight, which is a Canadian superhero team? I guess I saw somewhere, I guess some of the Alpha Flight members had worked at this space station, but I don't see them in this series at all.
No, and the last series that I had remembered seeing them in, the people that we would associate normally as Alpha Flight, they had become Omega Flight, and they were not funny anymore. Right? They were not it was not a fun, lighthearted, somewhat tongue-in-cheek book anymore. But yeah, I'm not sure why the space station is Alpha Flight, but I'm pretty sure that's fallout from Civil War 2. I don't know. It could have been earlier than that, but that's when I remember hearing about it, was after Civil War 2.
Okay. Well, if listeners have any idea, please let us know. I looked around a little bit. I couldn't find any information about it. So one of these highly powered heroes is the new Quasar, Avril Kincaid. And I guess that she had just debuted in Avengers Standoff, where she was originally a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. And then she somehow ended up with the Quasar powers. I'm not sure what the history of that is. But you see her in training in the Cap series.
Not sure either.
So the Chitauri, as we all remember from the first Avengers movie, have these they travel in these like big flying lizard creature things. I'm not sure what to call those. And one of those munches on Quasar.
Which
and
just one of the when they're telling you, oh yeah, she's like the most powerful thing in the universe, and then she gets eaten, and you're like, oh, okay, she's dead. Is she? I don't know.
Well, then she ends up in a hospital bed. I wasn't quite sure how that happened.
We don't want to talk about it.
But she's like in a coma or something. Oh, and then the narration, she was the protector of the universe, and when she fell, hope fell with her. So, that again. But we'll get to this more later, I guess, but I feel like this whole series hinges on Quasar being out of action. Because as soon as she's back, then the heroes make a lot of progress. And, this could have been a much shorter series if she stayed well. So it makes it feel a little, I don't know. I mean, I suppose it could happen that way, sure, but it makes it feel a little artificial to me that we need to get her out of the way so that this whole thing isn't a 3-issue event.
Yeah, I didn't know enough about Quasar to really understand her importance to this story, other than she was supposed to be more powerful than anybody else, and yet she gets taken out right away.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
There's always sort of a strange interaction with the galactic Marvel heroes, because they tend to be so much more powerful, and they often mix that with, oh, well, they can't be here right now because there's some emergency in space. And that seems just as suitable if they had needed it, right? Well, we're going to send her to go fight the Chitauri main force or something. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it does seem, I mean, it was impactful, right? Yeah. Having seen her train in the issues of Captain America and then get taken out like a chump.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maybe that was the whole plan, was kind of like with everybody else that was superpowered, is to kind of keep them on the outside, and she just happened to get taken out where nobody else did.
Well, right, and that was not part of Cap's plan, but
yeah, but the key feature was she couldn't take down the shield, right? That was the thing that was important. That
they had tested. Cap had her test before if she could take it out, and she took it out only 51% or something, and then she was out of power. So, I mean, it was framed as a test of the shield, but it was also kind of a test of her to see if there was any threat from her to his plan. So with the Chitauri invading and villains are rioting in New York City, Hydra is doing stuff around the country, so that triggers the SHIELD Act. And so the president, I don't know what happens to the president's just like shuttled off to a safe location and becomes irrelevant. And Cap just takes over. They act like he's the president in this, I feel like.
Yeah, they give him that power, and then the actual leadership of the United States doesn't matter anymore. They don't show up in the comic. They don't try to oust him. Nope, we're just not going to deal with that.
Yeah, we do see the president when I think it was Carol Danvers is presenting the idea of the planetary shield, and it appears to be Obama. You don't see his face, but you see him from the back. And it was, 2016, so Obama was still in office. Although I think by the time Secret Empire starts, it's 2017.
That sounds right.
So, I don't know, maybe
that checks.
These being done sometime ahead. Maybe it was done. We didn't know who would win the election, so they just never show the president in Secret Empire.
It almost feels like a Dark Knight Returns, where they're like, "Oh, well, we gave this power to Steve so he can handle it," instead of it being top down. It is top down, but in a different kind of way. Mm-hmm. Remember when everybody's shuffling people off, this is a state thing, let the mayor take care of it. Or the governor, and the governor's like, this is a city thing, let the mayor take care of it. The mayor's like, well, this is a police thing, let the commissioner take care of it.
Yeah, the pass the buck game.
Right. It almost was like, I'm the president, sure, but this seems, we gave Steve this power. He'll handle it.
This seems like a Captain America problem.
Right.
We trust him. He's a great guy.
Right. He's Captain America. What could go wrong?
Right. Well, that was kind of Nick Spencer's idea. So this was in a interview with the Daily Beast, and he mentioned that the previous writer of, was it, I think, Cap or Avengers, Rick Remender, had left a dangling plot thread that Hydra was thought to have infiltrated many different kind of teams and organizations in Marvel, and so somebody needed to root out those spies. So Spencer says, I started to kind of drill it down a bit, and I started wondering, what if there's just one Hydra plant? What if they think they're looking for 100 people, and it turns out there's just one really good one? And if there's just one really good Hydra plant, who would that be? Within a second, I realized that Steve was by far the person who could do the most damage. He's the leader of the Avengers, he has a relationship with the U.S. government, and he works closely with S.H.I.E.L.D., not to mention just his status in the Marvel Universe. He's a symbol. Everyone trusts him. Everybody looks to him as an authority. So you got, the most trusted guy in the Marvel Universe who turns out to be not worthy of the trust.
It's a great hook.
Yeah.
Yeah, Rick Remender did the Captain America Volume 7, I believe.
Okay.
And that's where he led up into losing his super serum.
Okay. And becoming 90-year-old Cap. Okay.
Yeah, aged him to his appropriate age.
Right. Yeah,
yeah.
He was born in the 20s or whatever.
Yeah. But that's a solid way to kind of pick up with a story that you may not have been as interested in otherwise. Yeah. Is to kind of take it to its, I guess, what you would consider its logical extreme of having that singular plant instead of having all these little disparate groups, but they're all kind of run by Hydra, having it be just this single entity, and who's more beloved than Captain America?
Right. So as soon as Cap is in charge, mysteriously the planetary shield goes back up. The rioters in New York suddenly back off. So Hydra has taken over some shield helicarriers, and these Hydra guys come in to where Cap is on the helicarrier with Sharon, and I think Rick is there. And Cap tells them to stop shooting, and they all hail him. Hail Hydra. And so that's the reveal to Sharon and others that Cap has gone Hydra. I mean, even though we know it already, it's still kind of a shocking scene because you can see the other characters and how they're reacting to it.
Right. And we also get another ingenious idea to get all of the New York superheroes off the table. Mm-hmm. They trap New York in the Dark Force, and then that's it. They're how many? What percentage of Marvel's superheroes are in New York? 80?
Right. Well, and the rioting was kind of planted there so that they would all be there in Lower Manhattan, and then we'll just slap a bubble on top of them. I felt like the explanation of that was a little unclear, but because there was this scene, I think, in the Cap series where Zemo goes to this guy's house, the guy Bob, and ties him up, but it's not quite clear who Bob is. And then the next thing you know, in issue 0, the two of them are in this boat, but Bob is in costume, and as what
Blackout.
But I wasn't really aware of Blackout, and so Zemo calls him Bob, but if you don't remember that scene from before, you can't make the connection. And so it was much later in the series that I finally remembered, okay, it was that guy who was tied up. Okay. But between Blackout's power and this, Darkhold magic book?
Yes, something like that, yeah.
That they put the bubble over Lower Manhattan. And then, of course, the high-powered heroes are now trapped outside of Earth by the planetary shield. So Cap has put a lot of potential challengers out of commission.
Right. You have a couple of teams of Avengers, and everybody else is pretty much out, including Jane Foster Thor.
Right. It happens in issue 1. Yeah, and it's not quite explained at the time, but I guess she's sent to some other dimension.
She gets banished, and then Cap gets that awesome scene where he walks up and picks up Mjolnir, which we don't find out until much later has been magically altered.
And I should say that happens in the Free Comic Book Day.
Issue 0.
It's
free comic,
the Free Comic Book Day, and that's also where Vision is taken over by a virus, and Wanda is possessed by a demon. So then Cap has those two working for him, kind of against their will, but they're under other control. So,
and then we find out that group is a trio, right? That it's Vision, Wanda, and then Thor. Mm-hmm. But Thor doesn't get his special moment in the sun. Like we don't, again, until issue 5, maybe issue 5 or 6, we don't find out anything about why Thor is working for Cap.
Right. Or we should say the Odin son, because Jane Foster is Thor and Thor is not Thor and whatever. Yeah, they call him the Odin son. But yeah, he's working for Cap, but we don't quite understand why at first. It seems to be just out of loyalty.
Well, it's that, and also Cap's ability to lift the hammer that Odin's son is not able to lift at this time. And so he views Cap as worthy where he is not.
And again, not recognizing that the inscription on Mjolnir was magically altered by Madam Hydra.
Yeah, I didn't notice that until towards the end of the series. What did it say?
That's the only time you see it.
Yeah, okay.
So we, as the reader, are also assuming that, Cap must be right? He's worthy. He picked it up, and then, boom. Oh.
You get hit with
You cheated, Cap.
Yeah. But that's a pretty cool moment. Even I was like, oh, okay. So,
whoever is the strongest shall wield the power of Hydra.
Hydra, yeah.
Okay. Oh yeah, here it is.
But yeah, it's a cool moment.
Whosoever holds this hammer, if he be strongest, shall possess the power of Hydra.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's a striking image to see Hydra Cap being deemed worthy in the eyes of the reader and all of the other superheroes.
Mm-hmm.
Because even they're like, when Odinson couldn't do it or whoever, he was worthy even in this moment.
So Secret Empire 1 starts out with just kind of everyday life in Hydra America.
And it seems
a school...
like a year has passed, maybe? Some amount of time has passed.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to say probably a year, maybe 6 months, but probably longer.
Yeah,
I don't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah, some time has passed for everyone to just accept that Captain America is their leader and that everything he says is pretty reasonable. Oh, Hydra really won World War II and we were just brainwashed universally?
Right, it's called The Great Illusion. And, they're teaching about it in school.
Yeah. And we get introduced to that little kid who I had zero idea who that was.
The brother of Barf?
Yes.
Is he someone I should know?
For this story, I guess he's just the perfect introduction to this world. Because he's sort of still got that little bit of rebellious, hey, didn't this happen? And the teacher kind of...
Erskine made Captain America. No, it was Arnim Zola.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Odinson. Inhumans are being rounded up and locked in camps.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, right.
Because people are afraid of them.
And this just because I always like to remind people, this was also during that time where Marvel was trying to get the X-Men back from Fox. Mm-hmm. And so they had put that moratorium on making new X-Men. So the Inhumans were the New Mutants.
Right. Yeah, I wonder where they're going to go with that now that Disney owns both Marvel and Fox. And yeah, there's no reason to avoid using the X-Men anymore.
The Inhumans are going to fall back into obscurity.
You're going to have, what's his name? Black Bolt and Medusa and a couple others, and then that'll be your Inhuman group.
Yep, and all the other people will miraculously find out they were mutants.
But I thought it was kind of weird that in ways it still kind of feels like there's more freedom than you would expect Hydra to let people have. I mean, they still have the internet. And you see a Hydra Council meeting in issue 1 where Viper is saying, I told you we shouldn't have let them keep the internet. But yet they did. And so, people can still put viral videos on YouTube of things that Hydra doesn't like. I mean, it's not even Chinese-style internet where everything is monitored and stuff the government doesn't like can be taken down.
I think it goes back to that idea of if you allow people certain liberties, they're going to be more likely to go with whatever is happening because they're comfortable. So I still have this. Obviously, they're not that bad because look at this video. Even though if it's something that Hydra wouldn't necessarily want to be seen, but it's still up, people are like, well, see, they're still allowing it. There's still this freedom.
Right.
You're not that oppressed.
And they want you, Nick Spencer clearly wants you to believe that maybe this isn't so bad, right? In the first couple issues, the Hydra-ruled government, unless you're a superhero or a resistance fighter, it doesn't seem all that different. Mm-hmm. Or I guess, or an Inhuman.
Yeah. But,
that council meeting that you were just talking about, Tim, right? Viper's in charge of public service or something, right? running all of these, normal operations with supervillains, but then of course it tanks relatively quickly.
Yeah. So, this again, it seems like Cap has become president somehow. The president and his cabinet are now irrelevant, which kind of hurts the argument at the end because, in Secret Empire Omega, at the very end of the series, when, good Cap and bad Cap are talking, and bad Cap is saying, I didn't take any power, you just gave it to me. And that's not completely true. Because they didn't give him the power of the presidency. The SHIELD Act didn't do that. So
yeah, but close enough that we can sweep the rest of it under the rug.
Yeah, let's keep fudging. I like fudge. If I eat too much fudge while I'm in quarantine, I'm going to be even fatter than I've become the past couple months. But
I think it's that idea of how much of your freedoms do you trade for that illusion of security? Mm-hmm. And so bad Cap is making that argument, whereas the other Cap is, you took it to the extreme. Mm-hmm. You are the problem. But he's like, I did what, I was given enough power to do.
Yep. They wanted me to handle it, and I handled it.
Mm-hmm. So, but this early, we're still seeing this foot dragging I was talking about, where, Cap doesn't want to send dreadnought robots to people's homes. He doesn't want to drug people. I think Dr. Faustus is talking about putting drugs in the water supply to make people more docile. Steve keeps delaying scheduled executions. I think Rick Jones, has a death sentence on him, but Cap said, "Oh well, let's do it later." But the council is telling him people don't fear the government quite enough.
And I really enjoyed that because it does play into Steve's humanity, but also that constant pull that he's getting to be more and more and more fascistic, supreme leader-like, and yet he's still trying to push back as much as he can because I think he sees it differently than the people that he surrounds himself with. Like I said, keeping the internet and keeping people, mostly, if you're not an inhuman or a rebel scum or whatever, that, you do enough and they're going to be more willing to go with you instead of trying to force it like Faustus wants.
Mm-hmm. Eliza, Madam Hydra, points out to Cap that what he needs to do is gather the pieces of the cube so the world can be returned to what it was before 1945. And so that could be a big undo. So he could just go crazy, she says. It doesn't matter who dies between now and then, because if you get the cube, you can just undo all that.
Yeah. Bring them all right back.
Yeah. And I guess it's in issue 2 that it's revealed that Selvig has scattered the pieces of the cube around the world.
And then killed himself?
Yeah, he kills himself at some point. I didn't quite get why, but...
Shoots himself with a laser so they can't interrogate him. That's my guess.
I suppose.
Yeah, I would guess so that nobody else knew where he'd put them, but they find them anyway, so... Mm-hmm. It's a death in vain. Maybe just to get him off the the playing board.
Captain America Steve Rogers and Secret Empire are published by Marvel Comics. Our discussion continues next week, and check the show notes for some of the best articles I found when researching this episode. Support this and all our shows by joining us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/deconcomics for more details. You can also help us out by reviewing us on Apple or any other podcast source. Do your shopping at deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon so that we get a percentage of the sale. And share our episodes on your social media. We appreciate your support in bringing Deconstructing Comics, Critiquing Comics, and To the Bat Polls to a larger audience. Help us get higher in podcast rankings by subscribing. It's free and you'll get episodes as soon as they come out. Most any smartphone or tablet comes with a podcast app installed, so if you're not using it yet, try it out. It's the best way to listen to podcasts. But, of course, you can always listen to all our episodes at deconstructingcomics.com or on our YouTube channel. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and Bulele and I will critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. Next week, Joe and Kendall return to help me wrap up our Secret Empire discussion. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.